If you love to bass fish, then you know right now is one of the best times of the year to go out and catch fish. No matter where you live in the country, spring is here, and it is a great time to get outdoors and enjoy the nice weather and catch some fish. But with that, you might have some tough days. In this video, we're going to share some tips and advice when the fishing is tough in the spring, because we know as anglers, it is not always as easy as it sounds. Hey, stay tuned. This is going to be a good one.
We're going to be talking about some common mistakes anglers make in the springtime of the year, sort of give you guys some tips and advice on how to avoid those mistakes and keep catching fish. So one of the things, or the main thing I wanted to talk about today is how wind direction affects bass in the springtime of the year and how a lot of anglers make the mistake about not adjusting to different wind directions. Specifically what I'm talking about, the mood and the personality shift of a bass after you have a cold front comes through. Guys, one of the things you'll find out is that in the springtime of the year, it's probably because a lot of the fish are shallow, that when a cold front comes through, it has a bigger impact on the fish than any other time of year. I've never seen the impact so severe on cold front fish as they are like in April and May. First of all, two or three of my top favorite techniques in the springtime of the year, this time of year in catching bass, is a floating worm, like a zoom trick worm, or a zoom super fluke, or maybe some type of a topwater lure. Those are three really good baits to catch them on this time of year. And they work really, really good if you have a south wind and normal temperature day or a little bit above normal, and specifically on some type of a steady barometric pressure. They work really good. But what happens if you have a cold front comes through, it severely impacts the way that those fish will react to those type of moving baits in shallow water. I'll give you a quick story here, and it illustrates perfectly what I'm talking about. I was fishing an April tournament down at Beaver Lake. This has been years ago. It was sort of like the end of April. Fish were spawning, a lot of fish are on the beds. And the day before the tournament, I had just an epic day on a super fluke and a floating worm. I probably had 50 bites, and they were nice fish. And I'd come up, I'd had my hook cut off, and I'd see them, and I'd shake them off. Needless to say, I couldn't wait to get out there for the next day of the tournament. And of course, that night, a bad cold front runs through. And we get up the next morning, the temperatures drop 15 degrees from what it was the day before. We have a strong north wind, bluebird skies. And I get out there to that area that I was fishing, and they wouldn't touch the fluke or the floating worm. I had maybe a half a dozen fish come up and look at it, but didn't bite it. But they would not touch it. And ever since then, I've learned from that particular lesson that if you have a cold front comes through, you have got to adjust your techniques. Don't make the mistake about staying with the same techniques, especially if it's with a moving bait, after a cold front rolls through. If a cold front rolls through and you're catching fish in the springtime of the year on any type of moving bait, I don't care if it's a chatterbait, a spinnerbait, a fluke, a crankbait, anything like that. If you have a bad cold front comes through, make an adjustment, go to like a finesse jig or a shaky head or a Ned rig or some type of a Texas rig, football head jig, whatever. But regardless, you want to fish on the bottom. Don't make the mistake of casting and winding and reeling those same baits through the shallow water column after a front rolls through. Those fish will tuck down on the bottom, and they will not chase a bait after that front rolls through for a day or two. So biggest tip I can give you guys is, fish moving baits, fish aggressive baits, under stable, warm weather conditions in the spring, and don't make the mistake of staying with them after that front rolls through. Slow down, fish the bottom, and you're going to keep catching fish all the way through that front. So hope it helps out. We'll see y'all next time.
In the spring, that means for a lot of anglers that, hey, I can go shallow and I can catch both numbers and size. And there are days where that happens, and we know it's a blast. But there's also days to where it is not that easy. You go up into your shallow pockets, your shallow coves, and you struggle to get a bite, or you struggle to even catch fish at all. And you're over here banging your head against the wall as, what can I do, and why are these fish not biting? Well, there are situations to where them shallow fish are hard to catch. For me right now, in the area that I live in, really this part of the country, the central to south region of the country, we've had an influx of rain. And what rain does is it affects each lake differently. Some lakes are going to rise more than others, and then when they do rise, are they going to stay there or are they going to fall? Well, as we know, guys, fish are going to go up and spawn in these shallow areas that we know they spawn at in the spring. But if they go up and that lake goes up and they go up with it, and then it starts falling, that affects their mood and their behavior. So, for instance, let's say you're fishing at a lake and it's starting to come down. And I know a lot of guys that, they'll go out 2-3 days, catch some fish, and then a week later they'll go right back there and not get a bite. Well, they do not watch the water levels. So right now, watching the water levels, or let's say you don't want to watch the water levels, or you don't know how, and you get up there and you look at the banks and you start seeing that water line coming down, guys, that means it's time to back off the banks. Okay, I know for me, I love to catch fish offshore, and this time of year I really still like to do it as well. I can go up shallow and catch them, but more times than not, I do better actually staying offshore. And when I say offshore, I'm not meaning 40, 50 foot, guys. I mean 20, 30 foot. I'm talking it could be 5 to 15 foot, just off the bank on areas to where these fish will still stage up at. They're your post spawn areas. So when you notice the water levels are falling, this is a time to right now look for your pre or post spawn areas. Okay, so let's say the fish did go up and that water starts coming back, then fish are going to go right back potentially to where they were staging up. Or it could be a piece of cover between where they staged and where they were. For example, let's say they're staging on a secondary point, and then you know that secondary point leads back to a cove and a spawning flat. If they go from that point to that spawning flat, and then that lake starts coming down, they will either go back to that point potentially, or they're going to go to a structure in between. That structure in between can be a brush pile. It can just be a single log that's out there off the bank. It could be a stump. It could be a hard spot. And a lot of anglers will overlook this. They'll just go up there, keep fishing the bushes, keep fishing the shallow grass, and they might catch some small fish, and they're going to keep catching them. But then what happens is they don't catch the bigger fish. One way I like to target these fish, and there's a couple ways, guys, just kind of think of your strengths. I mean, it could be a spinnerbait, it could be a shallow running crankbait, a deep diving crankbait, a jig, but one way I like to target them this time of year is with the Carolina rig. And one thing I'm just going to share with you guys is just a pre-made Carolina rig setup. This is the 6th Sense Carolina rig pre-rig setup. There's a couple brands out there that do it. I like the 6.6 version. They have a couple sizes. This is the 3/4. I have the 1/2 and 3/4 myself. So guys, if you do not want to throw the Carolina rig because you don't want to get a swivel out, get a bead out, get a weight, do all that just to go try to catch a fish, this right here makes it easy. So guys, just to help you save time with the Carolina rig, get your pre-rig Carolina rig setup. Hey, go ahead, throw the ball and chain. You will catch both numbers and quality size bass.
Anytime you're fishing during the spring months, you have to pay very close attention to your bait, and not specifically what your bait is doing, but what's happening behind your bait. Are you getting attention from fish that you wouldn't normally see if you weren't paying attention? Meaning during the spring, a lot of times what we get are followers. You get fish that come up and roll under your bait. You get fish that'll dart out quick and act like they're trying to chase your bait away. Sometimes you'll get fish that will follow your bait for 10, 15 feet away from where they're at, which is probably going to be a bedding location or an area where they're guarding fry. In either case, during the springtime, you have to pay very close attention to fish that are showing themselves behind your baits. This is a big mistake a lot of anglers make during the springtime. They're not watching their baits. They're not watching for any sort of motion behind their baits. And a lot of times you don't actually see the fish, but what you may see is a boil under your bait, or you see some water disturbance. Sometimes even I'll see my bait make a weird movement. Like they didn't actually bite it, but they come up and they'll like tail slap it, and you see your bait make an odd movement. A lot of times those are things that indicate there's a fish in that area. And when that happens, you can do a couple of things. You can slow down and potentially get that fish to bite. You can make multiple casts to that area because you know there's a fish hanging out there. Or a lot of times what works best is you leave that area, but you remember exactly where that fish was, and you come back later in the day and you can generate a bite from that fish because they're back in the location where they were at, getting ready to ambush your bait. But keep in mind, during the springtime, you've got fish really using objects as a home body. During the pre-spawn, you get a lot of fish that are going to use lay down trees or docks or bushes. These are areas they're just holding on to absorb warmth and to get ready for the spawn. Then once you move into the spawn, fish are on their beds, and from that standpoint, they're doing a lot of things to protect the beds and to protect the eggs. And after those eggs hatch, then you've got fry garters, and they're going to act the same way with fry garters as they do when they're on a bed with eggs. They're going to do whatever they can to chase your bait or anything that they consider to be a nuisance or an enemy to them. They're going to do whatever they can to chase it away. And a lot of times they don't have the intention of eating it. But if you continue to make multiple casts, their best way of defense is to eventually bite your bait. So you want to pay close attention. I cannot tell you the number of fish that I've caught when I never even saw the fish. I'd see a boil behind my bait, which told me there was a fish in that area. And this happens more times than not during the spring because, again, their intention is not necessarily always to eat. A lot of times it's more in self-defense or in protection of the eggs or the fry. So you want to pay attention to whether you have any activity behind your bait, whether that's just water disturbance or you actually visually see the fish. The point is, pay close attention to your bait. Watch your bait. Watch what's going on in those areas. Again, sometimes you don't see the fish. Maybe you're bringing a spinner bait through an area with a bunch of little bushes or with little branches, and you see some of those branches or pad stems or hay grass will make a movement that indicates there's a fish there. And that tells you you need to make some additional casts to that same spot, which a lot of times will generate additional strikes for you that you wouldn't have had you not been paying attention to what was going around around your bait. Use this tip. You're going to catch more fish during the springtime.
Quick, if you're struggling to find productive areas on your lake or are new to fishing and want to get pointed in the right direction about where to start fishing, head to our website, fishthemoment.com, and go to our lake breakdowns page. Here you'll find lake breakdowns from myself, Randy Blockett, and Matt Steffen. I focus on offshore breakdowns, Matt covers smallmouth, and Randy covers shallow water largemouth. These lake breakdowns provide 40 GPS waypoints that you can transfer straight to your fish finder. We give detailed area descriptions, the best conditions to fish each area, lure recommendations, and key strategies for the lake in general. We also give you a guide on how to transfer the waypoints straight to your fish finder so you don't have to worry about the technology gap there. You can scroll through and find breakdowns for all 4 seasons of the year. And we have a lot of lakes here, so you probably will find most of the major lakes in this list already. However, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom and don't see your lake in one of the 4 seasons, you can also get a personal lake breakdown from either Randy or Matt at the bottom of the page, and you can pick any lake in the country and get 40 waypoints picked out personally by Matt or Randy. Check out our lake breakdowns at fishthemoment.com.